Organizations are at very different stages in terms of their AI maturity. And what we've done in the report, which I think is truly novel, is classify organizations according to where they are in their AI journey.
So what are the stages that you found through the report?
It ranges from, at the very beginning, just what we call AI skepticism. And at stage 2, what we call AI activation. And we move to stage 3, what we call AI experimentation. And stage 4 is what we call AI scaling. And then stage 5, call AI maturity.
Do we actually measure and see if it contributes to our company's productivity or revenue?
AI cannot be a hobby. It needs to be an investment, right? This is a transformative technology. It has vast potential.
Welcome to Lead with AI, a podcast in which we speak with business leaders bringing AI to their work, teams, and organizations. In today's episode, we speak with Rebecca Hinds, the head of the Work Innovation Lab by Asana. This first-of-a-kind think tank conducts actionable research to help businesses navigate the constantly changing world of work. Rebecca earned her Ph.D. at Stanford University, where she focused her research on transforming organizations through technologies like AI and non-traditional work forms like hybrid and remote work. Received the Stanford Interdisciplinary Graduate Fellowship, considered one of the highest honors given to Stanford doctoral students. Her research and insights have appeared in publications including the Harvard Business Review, the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, Forbes, Wired, TechCrunch, and Inc. Here are 5 key insights you'll gain from our conversation. Number 1, the stages of AI maturity and how to identify where your organization stands. Number 2, the 5 C's framework for AI integration: comprehension, concerns, collaboration, context, and calibration. Number 3, what the top companies do differently to get AI right and why AI adoption means seeing AI as a teammate and not a tool. Number 4, how training, including tapping into power users, team leaders, and centralized resources is key. And number 5, the importance of investing in AI and why collecting employee feedback is crucial to drive successful AI adoption. Learn how to take your company or team from level 1 to 5 in just 30 minutes. So let's dive in. Very exciting. Last time we talked about work and where we work and when we work and a little bit about how we work. But today we will focus mostly on that. You just released an amazing study that I've shared to everyone that wants to receive it, together with Anthropic, actually, which is an incredible partner, about the state of AI. So what's the state of AI?
Sure. So this is a study. This is our second iteration of the state of AI at work. And it's essentially a deep dive into how organizations are adopting AI, what's working well, what are some challenges that they're facing, and most importantly, what are the companies that are getting it right with AI doing differently than the companies that are getting it wrong. It's based on a survey of more than 5,000 knowledge workers in the US and UK, but it also draws on numerous other inputs, expert viewpoints to understand how AI is changing or not changing the workplace. And I think the headline is that organizations are at very different stages in terms of their AI maturity. And what we've done in the report, which I think is truly novel, is classify organizations according to where they are in their AI journey and what are those distinguishing characteristics of the AI mature companies versus the ones that are less mature.
So we got to talk about that because everyone in our Lead with AI community is at different stages. So what are the stages that you found through the report? Maybe we can even talk about how do people move up into those stages to God level.
It ranges from, at the very beginning, the most nascent stage is what we call AI skepticism. And in general, in the workplace, we continue to see high rates of AI skepticism across the board, but especially among those individual contributors. There's a lot of skepticism in terms of the technology. Will it work? How do I learn how to use the technology? Is it biased? What's really interesting is we see the level of skepticism and the nature of skepticism change as we move to different levels of maturity. But at that very early stage one that we call in the report, we're seeing high levels of skepticism. We then see at stage two what we call AI activation. And this is actually where most organizations, they're most likely to fall into stage two right now. And so at this point, they're activating their AI initiatives. They're launching pilot projects to test the waters. They're starting to get their hands dirty with AI, but very small experiments and small AI initiatives. We move to stage three, what we call AI experimentation. And typically organizations have seen some level of success with AI. They've piloted it, they've seen some initial success. They're starting to ramp it up across different functional teams. They're starting to think more holistically about organizational wide AI adoption. Stage four is what we call AI scaling. So now AI is truly being integrated into the DNA of the organization. It's a core part of operations. It's no longer, ad hoc. It's truly embedded in the strategy. And then stage five, the pinnacle of maturity, is what we call AI maturity. And this is where organizations have successfully leveraged the technology in multiple different use cases. There's deep strategic alignment in terms of the technology and the business strategy. And AI is essentially working well for the organization, and they're starting to see those results.
And has anyone reached level 5 yet?
There are a few companies, so definitely there are some. And I think it's important to be able to identify them and learn from them as well.
And that's the LLMs themselves, probably, who were early enough to adopt all of it.
It's always this combination of like the technology and the human piece. And I think the companies that are getting it right with AI right now are thinking very carefully about both components. You can have amazing, great AI technology. And we've seen this in some cases where companies have invested in the latest, greatest AI technology, but they haven't thought deeply enough about the human piece. And that's where it breaks down really, really quickly in terms of you have the great technology, you don't have adoption of that technology by your people. And then there's little benefit to the technology if it's not truly ingrained in your organization and people aren't using it.
Yes, multiplication by zero is still zero. So you do need people using the technology. And that must be part of how companies level up, right? So what are some things that you're seeing in terms of what works to get everyone aboard the AI train?
So another part of the report is what we call the 5 Cs. And so we essentially, as you move from stage one to stage five, what's interesting is companies differ across these 5 key dimensions that we call the 5 Cs. And so their comprehension is the first one. So essentially we see at stage five, perhaps not surprisingly, employees within organizations have a much deeper comprehension of AI. So they know how it works. They've participated in training. They've leveled up their skill sets. They have that level of comprehension. The second is concerns. And this is an interesting one because what we see is we all have some concern around AI. It's inevitable that we do, but the nature of our concern differs depending on what stage of maturity our company is at. And so at stage one, we talked about skepticism. That's what we see. We see a lot of skepticism. And we see that skepticism focused on that first C of comprehension. So at stage one, most employees are focused on, are they able to learn new skills? They're concerned about, where do I go to learn AI? How do I up level my skill set? Whereas at stage five, the concerns center more on ethical and responsible AI, especially what we call, and lots of others call, interpretability. So can I interpret the results of the AI model? And so companies at stage five that are doing it well are really investing in tools or capabilities that enable employees to interpret the results of the AI model. The third, which I think is also fascinating, is collaboration. So we see that at stage five companies, they fundamentally are thinking about the technology differently in terms of the relationship of AI with humans. And what we see in particular is that at stage 5, employees are much more likely to see AI not just as a tool, but as a true teammate that they're working with. And in my PhD, I studied quite deeply this idea of technology framing and how throughout history we've seen that how people frame technologies matters deeply for how it ends up being adopted. And so this was something that I was super fascinated by, how this mindset shift from tool to teammate really can change the way you interact with the technology. And we see that's the case. We see that when employees are viewing AI as a teammate, they're much more likely to think holistically, not just about what AI can do for them as a tool, but how they can work with the technology as part of these human in the loop workflows. And it seems like a trivial mindset shift, but we see it in the research. And we're just doing a study we're about to release in a couple weeks on the importance of this AI mindset, and it matters. It has an outsized impact. So that's a really important one. And then the fourth one is context. What does your organizational context look like that you're bringing AI into? And here is where we see a lot of opportunity for improvement across the board. We consider context to encompass the policies you have around AI, the principles, the guidelines, and it's shocking how few companies have any sort of policy, have principles, have guidelines in terms of how do you use AI. That's what we see at those stage 5 companies. They not only invest a lot of time into developing those foundational elements, but they do it early. And then the final one is calibration. So we know that we need to be assessing the results and measuring the impact of these AI tools. And at those stage 5 companies, they're much more likely to be evaluating the success of their AI initiatives compared to stage 1, where it's much more sporadic, it's unstructured attempts to measure the impact of AI. And so what I think is important about this framework is it's multiple different levers that you need to be pulling to make AI work. It's not just having a policy, it's not just framing the technology, it's not just learning and development. It's a combination of these different factors. And I think the 5C framework helps to provide some of that scaffolding in terms of the elements that you should be thinking about as you work towards AI maturity.
So I love this framework because it is so 6C, it's so clear in terms of where should we get started. But it sounds like a lot of work. So you're already investing in the technology, then you have to invest in all of these 5Cs. At what point do companies start to say, we don't even know if this is going to be worth it, right? To the final C of, do we actually measure and see if it contributes to our company's productivity or revenue? Like, where do companies make that assessment of whether this is all even worth it?
AI cannot be a hobby. It needs to be an investment, right? This is a transformative technology. It has vast potential. I think there's no question that it has the potential to positively impact every business if implemented correctly. But it can't be something that you invest, 5% of your effort into. It needs to be upfront an investment. Now, I think it's important to start small, and that's where feedback and results and iteration really matter deeply. I think the most important, if I had to say one initiative that an organization should take as they're going on their AI journey, it's to collect feedback. We see that far fewer companies in that stage 1 are actually collecting feedback from their employees on whether AI is working or not. Those stage 5 companies are much more likely. We see over 90% of them actually collect feedback, whereas stage 1, far fewer of them actually collect the feedback. That's essential because your employees are very well in tune in terms of whether AI is working and what challenges it's solving on the ground. I think biggest struggles I see companies face right now, one I see that's relevant to what we're talking about here is companies try to over-engineer the metrics that they're using to assess AI, and they try to cover everything. They try to develop, a scorecard that encompasses 20 metrics. They try to over-engineer the evaluation of success. And I think that's where things can spiral really quickly. At the earliest stages, I think the most important thing you can do, in addition to having clear guidelines and a perspective on the role of AI in your organization, is to collect that feedback from employees. Understand, is it working? Are they able to learn how to use the technology? How often are they using the technology? And not assume that just because a technology is technologically sound, it's going to be adopted in your organization.
Another thing that really jumped out to me in the report, to me is very alarming actually, is also the gaps between individual employees. So some people, depending on the stage of the company maybe, but some people getting it and wanting to try it out and starting to really learn it, and then some people not really getting into it. I'm really worried that that's going to create a gap that's only going to widen, because the longer you wait with learning it, the more difficult it's going to become to get into it, as the technology develops way quicker than anything we've seen before. So I started in the report, but maybe any kind of context around, what is that gap? What does it look like? And also what can companies do to make sure that everyone goes along at least in a somewhat similar pace?
And I think the gap is especially concerning because we see it across multiple dimensions, but we especially see it across the levels of hierarchy, such that individual contributors are much less likely to use AI and feel enthusiastic about using AI compared to senior executives. And they're also disadvantaged in so many other ways in terms of having resources to pay to attend conferences or AI courses. And so I do think there's a real fear of the gap widening. I think one of the biggest pitfalls that organizations are falling into is they assume that they can develop one size fits all training. And for AI that's so persona specific, so functionally specific, one size fits all training rarely works. I think it can work for some of the principles and ethics and safety type training, but it can't work for the day to day. How are you truly going to embrace this technology as a core part of your workflow? It needs to be functionally specific. Marketing needs to have their own training compared to engineering and sales. And so we see often that a lot of the training is focused on the technical folks in the organization, the engineers as well. And they're arguably also the most able to learn the technology on their own. And so you see these multiple different dimensions of these potential gaps widening. And I think it's really important to invest in that learning and development at the very early stages. As you said, this technology is evolving so quickly. And I truly believe the more we can learn with the technology, learn with a fundamentally flawed technology is super important, because the only way to keep up with these changes in models and capabilities and all the different components of AI is to learn with them and learn how they're evolving. And right now, I think there's a big wait and see mentality within a lot of organizations where let's roll out the technology, let's see if it has impact, and then we'll invest in training. And it never works well when it's that progression.
And that's why it's nice to look at something you mentioned in the report around these level 5 organizations, to look at how they're doing it. Because if you can see things like, well, people treat it as a coworker, not as technology, right? People work with it embedded within their workflow. Typically, those power users have way more use cases for how to use AI than someone who's more of a novice, right? So you're looking at those organizations, you look at those examples. Okay, that's something I can follow. Then still, again, like people listening to this maybe at all kinds of different levels of that adoption curve. So what are some fundamentals that anyone can implement? I'm just thinking about something practical like training by team, right? So, okay, that sounds fantastic, right? But for an organization, now we need someone to train the marketing team. Now we need someone to train the sales team, right? Like, how do we practically get started, or how do we practically continue on that evolution?
I think a big first step is actually having a philosophy around the role of AI within your organizations. this is something that we did very early at Asana is we're very thoughtful about what are our principles around AI. And we talked a little bit before we went live around why we partnered with Anthropic and how our principles and overarching viewpoints of AI were very much in alignment. That's something we thought about very, very early in terms of how are we viewing the role of AI alongside humans. And I think that has so many different positive impacts on your organization. It gives employees confidence of, what is this technology going to be used for? What is the purpose of it? It's not going to be used to, the purpose of it isn't to take my job, it's to amplify my human skill sets. And I'm still going to be in the driver's seat because AI is playing a supportive function or a teammate function. And I think having that clarity is in a sense type of training. You're training through having a resource that employees can point to and turn to as they're navigating this new technology. I do think, training can be expensive. I do think the investment is worth it for organizations right now. I also think there are power users in every organization I've seen where they're very willing, in my experience, to share their learning, share success stories, share different initiatives that they've found to be helpful in their learning journey. We did a fantastic workshop a couple weeks ago with a group of Stanford students who came to learn, and we had some of our internal AI experts teach them, how do you write a prompt? And these were all employees that weren't trained in delivering AI trainings, but had deeply invested in the technology themselves in terms of up-leveling their skill sets and were able to lead a successful session. So I think that you can be creative in how you go about training, but it needs to be a concerted effort. And I think the investment is absolutely essential.
And perhaps even combine it. You can say, we're going to write a charter for the company. This is the role of AI, not just in our product in the future of our business, but also internally, how we're going to use it. What is the role? What are some of the ethics, maybe some of the core principles around that? And then you have these enthusiasts that you should definitely tap into, right? Because people who get this, they really get it. And I think they love to share, right? They're very innovative, very forward thinking. They would love to share it to other people and get them involved and mobilize them. What are some practical things that you've done even in your team in a smaller scheme, or maybe in the organization? What are some practical things you've done to get everyone on AI? And I'm assuming your journey started quite a bit before most people's journey with AI.
I remember one of our first reports, and this would have been about 2 years ago when we started the Work Innovation Lab. We were a very scrappy team. We didn't have a lot of resources, and we started to use AI very early to generate the images for our reports. So we weren't paying for the expensive stock photos. We were using Dolly to create images for these reports very, very early. And I remember going through, the approval processes to be able to use the technology internally. And it was so new. It was so new that you could do this, that you could create images using AI for reports. And we ended up saving a lot of money very early. And ever since that point, I've really encouraged my team to use AI for everything possible, at least once, try it for everything possible. And I think that activity where you're truly immersing in the technology, because that's how you understand whether AI can be beneficial or whether the human is still better suited to perform a given task. So my team uses AI deeply, and we also, a lot of our team is really technical. So we're also developing our own models, and a big part of our work involves working with customers to help them understand how they're collaborating and how those collaboration patterns lead to certain work outcomes. And on my team, Dr. Mark Hoffman, who's led a lot of this work, and he has developed these deep, deep AI models, neural networks that are able to deeply understand the specific collaboration patterns within an organization and how they're contributing to different work outcomes. So what I've seen as well is in every company, there was an initial push to, okay, we're going to invest in AI. We're going to have these internal trainings. And I've seen that taper off, whereas recognizing there is that natural taper effect that often happens with new technology, I think we've made a concerted effort to keep trying new use cases, not sort of rest on our laurels in terms of what we know AI works for, and continue to push the technology and see where it does and does not work.
I love that idea of just using it for everything possible. I think Ethan Mollick always calls that like always give AI a seat at the table. Prove yourself wrong, right? Like just try AI, see if it works for that. And then you may be surprised or maybe not so surprised that it works well for certain things and it doesn't work well for other things.
Because the technology is evolving so quickly too, it might not work today, but it might work tomorrow. And having that, constant iteration, I think is so important.
I was going to say that's the other element of this. We sometimes see this in discussions on X, right? Oh, what tool can I use for this or that? And it's like, you should use that. Oh, I tried it 3 months ago, didn't work. Yeah, but like everything has changed already. So there's so much happening. Do you have any rituals or any things that you've baked into your way of working to get people to keep exploring new tools? Also maybe share and maybe highlight successful use cases to, keep that habit going of constantly trying things with AI?
I think it's a multi-pronged strategy. So I do think we have several Slack channels, both within our team at the Work Innovation Lab as well as at Asana, where we're constantly sharing, what are we learning? What are we using AI for? What are some success stories? And I think that like constant sharing and also sharing failures and sharing where AI has fallen short of expectations is also important. I think having some sort of channel to do that is really important. I think you should have a list of people or publications that you constantly follow and keep tabs on. I think you're one for me for sure, Don, where I'm constantly, turning to your posts and your newsletters to learn the latest. I think Charter is another one that I love. I think they produce amazing content. And if you have 3 or 4 pieces, I think it can get overwhelming to try to keep up with everything. But if you have those go-to sources, that's often always enormously helpful. For me, I still am very deeply embedded in the research community and the academic community. So I'm always keeping abreast of those developments as well. And I think for every person, it's going to be different. I do think you should have a domain specific type of resource or resources where if you're a marketer, having those domain specific ones is important too. And I think conferences, there are a lot of great both virtual and in-person conferences on AI. I know VentureBeat, Transform, and it's often super beneficial to not only go and listen to the sessions, but also talk to people and have those conversations in the hallway where you're learning things that you might not be able to learn from a stage presentation, but you're truly interacting in a way that gets into the nuts and bolts of how people are actually adopting the technology.
Definitely. And I had AJ Thomas on recently, and she said like curiosity is going to be our biggest superpower. It's developing very quickly, but we cannot just let it wash all over us. We need to actually be curious and dive into it. And I also really like that point about being connected to something in your industry, because like you said, this is all going to be 10 times more valuable if you get the application within your particular field, how to use AI in marketing, AI in sales, AI in leadership. That learning community is so powerful to be a part of, because you can ask the stupid questions, you can get recommendations, you can problem solve outside of maybe what you would do within your own team or company. So I think all of those are valuable. So I'm going to ask you 3 rapid fire closing questions. Number 1 is your favorite AI tool besides Asana.
I'm going to say Asana because I think, and Asana we use OpenAI Anthropic, so talking about multiple tools really at the foundation. But I think Asana just has so many different AI use cases that I've actively used and embraced as part of my role. My favorite is the what we call smart status updates, where We are very good at documenting at Asana, and that documentation has historically taken a lot of time. And we've just passed the end of June. At the end of the month, I used Asana AI to generate all the status reports for all my projects. Every research report for the state of AI, I said ask AI for a summary of this project, where it showed up in the news, where it showed up in various places, and you can always edit it. And I often always do at the end status update, but it saves hours of time for me every month. And I think that tangible benefit is something that I'm grateful for and impressed by.
Okay, that's totally worth it as a favorite AI tool. Then maybe one unique use case of how you're using AI in typical daily workflows.
Super different, super impactful, where he's developed AI models to essentially be able to evaluate a company's propensity for innovation and various other work outcomes just by how they're collaborating on Asana. When I think about the pinnacle of using AI at work, it's to improve how we work together. It's not to boost individual productivity, it's to truly enhance teamwork and organizational effectiveness. And that's where we're headed. And with the Work Innovation Score, being able to assess team dynamics using AI and learn what the best companies do differently is both unconventional and incredibly exciting.
So after all of this, a lot of to-dos, a lot of call to actions, what's one thing that business leaders should do tomorrow to get ahead in AI?
I think it's start collecting employee feedback. Every organization these days does some sort of pulse survey or engagement survey. It's very easy to embed a few questions. And I think I'd encourage you to sort of base those questions on the report and those different C's and stages of maturity. It's not a heavy lift. And I think it's something that every organization can do. And every organization is going to learn from how employees are embracing or probably moreover resisting the technology right now.
Amazing. So even with all this innovation, it still comes back to you got to listen to people. Rebecca, thanks so much for being on.
Thanks so much, Dan. It was fun.
Thank you for joining us today as we heard about the journey of AI adoption in organizations from Rebecca Hinds of Asana. Here are the actionable key takeaways from the conversation. Number 1, understand the 5 stages of AI maturity. Rebecca introduced us to a framework that classifies organizations based on where they are in their AI journey: skepticism, activation, experimentation, scaling, or maturity. Rebecca explains that organizations are at very different stages when it comes to AI maturity. Knowing where you stand helps you identify what steps you need to take to progress. And an important way to progress is looking at stage 5 companies, because Rebecca explained that they think fundamentally different about the relationship of AI and humans. Make this shift in perspective, as it's crucial for advancing AI adoption. Number 2, implementing the 5 C's framework. To progress towards AI maturity, practice the 5 C's: comprehension, concerns, collaboration, context, and calibration. These elements combined provide a holistic approach to AI implementation. As Rebecca emphasized, it's multiple different levers that you need to be pulling to make AI work. It's not just having a policy, it's not just framing the technology, it's not just learning and development. Sit down and look at each of the 5 C's to understand what your next actions should be. And then, look at practical ways stage 5 companies step into AI, like always letting AI collaborate on tasks. Number 3, focus on the human element with AI as a teammate. Technology alone isn't enough. Successful AI adoption requires employee buy-in and understanding. As Rebecca pointed out, you can have amazing, great AI technology, but they haven't thought deeply enough about the human piece, and that's where it breaks down. Importantly, shift the perception of AI as just a tool to a true teammate for ultimate human-AI collaboration, like stage 5 companies do. Then, employees look at AI not just about what it can do for them, but much more holistically, opening up more avenues to derive value from AI. This idea of framing AI correctly was core to Rebecca's PhD research, and it's proving true once again. Number 4, provide tailored, function-specific AI training. Not every employee will pick up AI equally. One-size-fits-all approaches rarely work for AI training. Each department may need its own specific guidance, and that also means going beyond just the technology teams. Rebecca advised that marketing teams, for example, need to have their own training compared to engineering and sales. Look at the leaders and AI power users within your company that can help teams on this journey. That targeted approach ensures that each team understands how AI can enhance their specific workflows. Additionally, it's crucial to have a resource, a channel, or a person that people can turn to when they have questions about how to use AI, as Nicole and Helen from Women Defining AI told us last week as well. And finally, number 5, continuously collect and act on employee feedback. As Rebecca shared, AI cannot just be a hobby, it needs to be an investment. But for AI to positively impact every business, it has to be implemented correctly. And you need to assess whether AI is working based on employee feedback. Rebecca strongly recommended to start collecting employee feedback and make sure you're not in the dark in terms of how AI is being adopted and if it's valuable for your company. Survey your people regularly and, importantly, show how their inputs are used to make tangible changes in how you adopt and distribute AI. By implementing these strategies, you can more effectively navigate the complex process of AI adoption and move your team or company towards AI maturity. Join me again next week when I speak to Marleen de Koning, the HR Tech and Digital Director at PwC, about their implementation of Microsoft Copilot. And if you like this episode, please hit subscribe and give this podcast 5 stars on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. This helps a lot in helping more people gain the transformational benefits of AI at work. And to be the first one to get updates on new episodes, subscribe at flexos.org/AI.